I know the story. The story of Umar ibn Khattab when he's sitting in his majlis, in his gathering, when he was the Khalifa, and in his gathering there's a lot of who to come into the gathering. Abdullah ibn Abbas. Ibn Abbas at the time, and when you think about it, is a teenager, late teenager. Because Abdullah ibn Abbas himself was 15 years old when the Prophet passed away. 15. So when Umar took over 2.5 years after the death of the Prophet. So, and then he started his gatherings. Abdullah ibn Abbas is 18 years old, maybe maximum 20, not more than 20 years old. In a group in which, who's there? All these elders. Umar himself is in his late 50s, you know what I mean? You have elders that are 60 years old, 40 years old, and then you have this 18-year-old sitting with all of them. And they got offended. As was, typical, there was this idea of ageism. You have to kind of qualify to sit in our gathering. And they would go to Umar and they said, Ya Umar, you're bringing in this kid to sit with us. Should we bring our sons as well? We have sons that are his age, right? Why are you bringing him? So Umar bin Umar, radiallahu anhu, he says, okay, I'll show you guys why I'm bringing him. It's your opinion, right? And everybody's like, huh? Some people started to explain just that there were groups of Muslims who believed that there's an apparent and then there's a hidden. We're not saying that it's hidden, it's accessible. They said it was hidden. This deviant groups of Muslims would say that it's hidden in the sense that, and they have dreams or they consult with their heart and Allah told me this. We're not talking about this. What we're talking about tafseer here is where the explanation beyond the superficial, which just takes sometimes for people to kind of think about it a little deeper. That's all it is. Think about this just a tiny bit deeper, right? So Umar ibn Khattab, he asks everybody there. These are major Sahaba. What do you say about إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحِ? They said, I don't know. It means that, Allah is telling the Prophet, إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ الْفَتْحِ, when Allah's victory comes in the conquest. Very good, right? وَرَأَيْتَ النَّاسَ يَدْخُلُونَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا. You see people in groups entering the religion of Allah, then obviously be thankful, worship Allah, and ask for forgiveness. This is what it means. What else does it mean, right? So then Umar looks to Abdullah ibn Abbas and he says, وَمَا تَقُولُ أَنْتَ? What do you say? He says, نُعِيَ فِيهَا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ بِدُنُوِّ أَجَلِهِ. The Prophet ﷺ was given news that his death is imminent. What? Where did you get this from? Look at the depth of his thinking. Look at the depth of his understanding. He's not talking about the superficial, just whatever you read from just reading the verses. He's telling him that the Prophet ﷺ was given news of his close death in this surah. But is the word death mentioned? No. How does he know this then? Where is he getting it from? Right, you've done your job. Why is he telling him about the conquest and people enter? He knows this. Obviously the Prophet has experienced this. So why is Allah telling him what he's actually going through? And then at the very end he says, فَسَبِّحْ بِحَمْدِ رَبِّكَ وَاسْتَغْفِرْهُ إِنَّهُ كَانَ تَوَّابًا. Make sure you're still praying. فَسَبِّحْ بِحَمْدِ. By the way, anytime you see in the Quran, فَسَبِّحْ بِحَمْدِ, this is salah. Right? Whenever it says فَسَبِّحْ بِحَمْدِ, this actually means salah, because salah has tasbih and tahmid, both. Doesn't mean the superficial meaning of just saying subhanallah, alhamdulillah. It actually means salah. This is what Abdullah ibn Abbas, he says. Clearly here, he's telling the Prophet ﷺ, pray, remember your prayer. Because obviously, can a person get busy with the conquest, with now Islam expanding, now there's a fledgling nation being built, etc. But it's not focused still on your worship, right? And ask for forgiveness and repent to Him. Obviously, what do we want before our death? We want a repentance. So clearly that reference is an inference to the idea that his end is near, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Abdullah ibn Abbas knew this because he knew when the surah was revealed. So obviously, do we have to know when it was revealed? Yes. So this is why we went over, the time frames of when surahs were revealed, when verses, when things happen, because this helps us understand it better. And after Abdullah ibn Abbas said this, none of the people there knew this. But then Umar agrees with Abdullah ibn Abbas and says, وَاللَّهِ لَا أَعْلَمُ مِنْهَا إِلَّا مَا الَّذِي تَقُولُ. إِلَّا الَّذِي تَقُولُ. He says, Wallahi, by Allah, I know nothing of the surah except what you just said. To Abdullah ibn Abbas. Meaning even Umar had a good deep knowledge of tafsir beyond just reading. And this is what we want to do, inshallah ta'ala. This is why when we actually get to the surahs, and you'll see this sometimes, is that we want to kind of analyze the verses a little bit deeper, right? Look at the context, look at what it is. And then obviously how they apply to us as well. Because the Quran is meant to be a dynamic book. We're not saying that we need to reinterpret the Quran. La. The interpretation has already been done. And you'll see like in the tafsir it's been done. We take that into consideration and then obviously like engage with it as well. Okay? This is what we want to do. The technical definition obviously means clarifying or clearing the meaning of the Quran for us. And the word that's used is exegesis. And this is, by the way, what Christian scholars use for their tafsir when they do of the Bible. But their principles of exegesis are completely different than ours. They have their own principles that they do for exegesis when they actually talk about the Bible. And a lot of times and this is why also they've disregarded their whole law, and they've just said, whatever comes to you, this is the idea. Christians would come and they'd say like, Imam, can I ask you a question? I'd be like, yeah, sure, go ahead. And he'd be like, how do you choose your khutbah? Right? Khutbah choice. I was like, what do you mean? He said, do you like pray about it a little bit and just kind of like think? I'm like, I don't do anything like that. What are you talking about? And for them, they're kind of like, I just kind of read and, whatever I'm like, no, man, we have we have a list of topics that the ummah actually needs, and we need to go through those topics, that we need to bring up on the minbar. It's a very active thing. It's not theoretical or just kind of how I feel about it. This is why you'll see, like if you listen to Christian sermons, a lot of times what will happen is, they'll stand on the pulpit, and then they will say like, and the story of Job for me means, that, and then they just go off on a tangent that's completely irrelevant to the text. So he's no longer doing tafsir of the text. He's just kind of relating his modern life. So it's more of a focus on the individual than it is on the text. Where in tafsir, we want to do both. We want to focus on the text, but also focus on how it applies to us, but not do the other way around, where we project our own personal biases onto the text. This is obviously completely wrong. So far so good? طيب. What's the ruling on tafsir, or on learning tafsir? When we say what's the ruling, ما هو الحكم, there are 5 rulings in Islam. Wajib, mustahab, mubah, halal, and makruh and haram. These are the 5 rulings. There's nothing outside. So when we say what's the ruling on, it's going to be one of these 5 categories. By the way, can the same thing have all 5? Can the same thing have all 5? Okay, let me rephrase my question. Can a person, an individual, get all 5 for the same thing? No. But the same thing, can I give a different ruling for 5 different individuals? Yes. Very good. Do you guys understand this? So the same thing can have technically 5 different rulings depending on the person. For example, zawaj, marriage. For some people, marriage is wajib. Right? For some people, it's mustahab. For some people, it's mubah. For some people it's makruh, and for some people it's haram. We have all 5. Now I know a lot of people are going to ask, okay, how would it be, what's the case in which marriage is haram? And there's I can give you a ton of examples in which I will agree, certain people should not get married. It's haram for them. And for some people it's wajib. Who, for example, let's talk about, just as an example, for who is marriage wajib? Aywa, for the person who fears I will commit a sin, if you fear that you will commit a sin, you need to get married. Because the removal of sin is more important than anything else. In fact, scholars, I've yet to find, I've asked this question to multiple scholars, I've yet to find a sheikh who says, for that individual, if they have money, should they go to Hajj, which is one of the pillars of Islam, or should they get married? Are we saying that they have to get married? Why is it wajib in this case? Yes, because for the qa'idah we have this rule. So he has to get married. Because Hajj, there's no removal of sin, but there's bringing about reward. So then once he settles down and gets married, then after this he can go to Hajj inshallah ta'ala. Does that make sense? Yeah. wajib, yes, 100%. This is what we call fiqh al-awlawiyat, which is the fiqh of prioritization. Meaning, ayyul khayrayni khayr, which of the two goods is best, wa ayyul sharrayni ashar, which is the two evils is worst. Right? And there's a whole discussion on this. Does that make sense? Obviously, does everybody know for who it's mustahab? Yes. If a person doesn't necessarily fear sin, but obviously he has the capability, both financially and physically, to get married, following the sunnah is recommended, so for him it's mustahab. For whom is it mubah? It's allowed. There aren't any sisters, are there? It's for the person who physically can and financially can take on an additional wife. For him it's merely mubah. It's neither recommended nor makruh, especially if he can fulfill the rights, etc. Does that make sense? So mubah meaning it's allowed. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَانْكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُمْ, whatever you want. Marry whatever you want from the women, مَثْنَى وَثُلَاثَ وَرُبَاع. So that in that person it's mubah. Right? We can't really say it's mustahab, but we can't say it's makruh for sure. Person it's makruh where they might have some sort of shortcomings when it comes to fulfilling the rights of the wife, etc. Or that maybe financially, or maybe physically he's struggling, right, to maintain a wife, because obviously there's a physical aspect as well. For that person it's makruh. Why? Because the wife might agree. She might say, you know what, I'll marry you, even though you're poor, I'll marry you. But she's still not completely, fulfilled in her whatever, in that aspect, or he's ugly, he's not necessarily handsome, etc., then she might agree, but in her heart she wants it. For that person it's makruh. For whom is it haram?
One is already fixed.
Aywa, so in the case of the fifth, very good. What else? Yes. MashaAllah, MashaAllah. He's been answering all the questions, guys. What is this? Him by himself. He's عنده عيب شرعي. He has something that's specified in Islam that prohibits him from marrying, unless there's complete full disclosure. And also that same prohibition, for example, exists in the woman as well. Does that make sense? An example of this, for whatever reason, does he have to fully disclose this? No, let's say he cannot, he is unable to be intimate with, he's going to get married, and he does not tell them, he does not tell the family or the wife that this is what's wrong with me. Or let's say, for example, he knows, we had a case like this. There was a guy who came and he had cancer in his body, and the doctors told him, you will never have children. When he went and got married, guess what? He didn't tell his wife, and he knew this. What's the ruling? The wife says, I want to get a divorce. Guess what we told her? You're within 100% of your right to actually get a divorce. He knew this and he did not disclose it. And having children is one of the purposes of marriage, and so he can't do this. You understand now what I'm saying? People who have even STDs, if a person has an STD and he knows that he has it, it's medically proven, etc., he must disclose it to the person that he's getting married to. And it's haram for them to not, because in this you're doing harm to her. She gets married and now she's afflicted with a disease that she before didn't have. You're doing damage. For those people, it is haram to get married until they disclose. Now if they disclose, obviously there's cases to do this. By the way, we've run into cases like this where there's a person who was a convert and they had a history, they had a past, come and get married. Obviously in these cases we tell them, look, if you have but the person has to fully 5 rulings depending on the individual situation. And this is why, by the way, as an added disclaimer, fatwa shopping and even uneducatedly reading fatwa online and trying to apply them to yourself is also, there's some problems that can come up with this. It's not at that same level. So we can't apply someone else's fatwa on yourself, especially if it's an individualized fatwa. Does that make sense? Inshallah. Our question, what's the ruling on tafseer? Which one of the 5 does tafseer have? Aywa, it's wajib. Very good. Fard ayn, wajib, same thing. If he says fard, he says Same thing? Yes. Generally speaking, the fuqaha agree upon this. What's the proof that it's wajib? We said wajib, what's the proof? Does the Quran itself say this?
Yes.
That you have to understand the Quran? The Quran itself, here's the verse. It says, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَى I'm sorry, this is one of the proofs. It's a blessed book that has been revealed. What? So that they what? So that they reflect upon its verses. Meaning, it's as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that the whole purpose behind revealing the Quran is action, for people to actually understand. Because if you don't understand the book that you're reading, which is the Quran, obviously that negates its whole purpose. The purpose of the Quran is to be understood, not to be recited beautifully and then that's it. We go home and we heard something nice, khalas. And we have to understand it. The next verse that I prematurely read, أَفَلَا تَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا. Then do they not reflect upon the Quran, or are there locks upon their hearts? There's an added thing in here, is that sometimes two people will hear the Quran and they might understand it linguistically, but because Allah opens and another person's heart is locked, they might not understand it as deep or as fully as they can. So there's a spiritual element to understanding the Quran and really engaging with it. Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, he mentions this. We'll talk about it inshallah ta'ala, I think next week or the week after that, bi'idhnillah. Okay. The importance of tafsir continued. We have narrations from Umar, from Uthman, from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and many others. These are just three top examples that they said this, which is what we used to not go past or beyond 10 verses from the Quran, except that before in terms of actions, in terms of understanding, etc. ما كنا نتجاوز العشر آيات. We never went beyond 10 verses. Some narrations even mention 5, but here we'll just say 10. Obviously, is it 10 verses that you have to engage with them, you have to understand them. Also, it'll help you memorizing when you understand the verses. Who's experienced this? Like when you're memorizing, if you actually understand or try to read just a little bit of tafsir, you know what the words mean, does it actually facilitate in your memorization? 100%, because that'll actually help you recall. You'll actually know that you made a mistake, and you might not fully know the mistake, but you know because I'm not hitting the right meaning, etc., and all these other things. So there's a lot to be said about it. Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he says, obviously reason dictates that anybody who reads any book, whether it be in like math, science, medicine, etc., that you need to learn an explanation of that book. So obviously, what about a book? He's asking this question to Muslims. Through which is our salvation, right? Our additional. This is a very dangerous verse. This verse has motivated many scholars to actually teach and publicize the knowledge that they themselves gained, even if they gained the knowledge initially for their own personal gain. They never gained that knowledge to share it necessarily with the public. They just wanted to learn better. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, here He mentions in this verse, where He says, وَإِذْ أَخَذَ اللَّهُ مِيثَاقَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ لَتُبَيِّنُنَّهُ لِلنَّاسِ وَلَا تَكْتُمُونَهُ. When Allah took a covenant from those who were given the scripture, saying you must make it clear to the people and do not conceal it. Right? We have a hadith that basically mentions one of the people that will be punished in the hellfire is who? عَالِمٌ كَتَمَ عِلْمًا. It's a knowledgeable person, a scholar who had knowledge and he did not share it with the people. Sharing your knowledge, especially if it's knowledge about the Book of Allah, which is the most important knowledge, as we're establishing, is one of the most important things that a person has. What's the point of sharing this knowledge? It's for the guidance of mankind, for the help, for the obviously personal salvation, and then for people to be guided as well, and for them to be saved. And it goes without saying, which is better? Can a person continue to worship Allah without proper knowledge of the Quran? How good is their worship? Is there a difference between a worshipper who worships based upon knowledge and a worshipper who doesn't have that knowledge? Yes, there's a huge difference. Are they both worshippers? Yes. Yani can a person come to the masjid and even if he only has like a few surahs memorized and whatnot? Yeah, of course. But is there a difference between a person who has substantial knowledge, especially about the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, versus that person who barely has any knowledge? Huge difference. Okay. Oh. Sorry guys. My finger hit the X, which is a dangerous thing. Obviously now we're talking about the danger of tafsir. Number one, you're translating for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is that dangerous? Can you misspeak? What happens if you misspeak? Yeah. Yani imagine Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down His book, clarified it, etc. And then you come and you just completely misinterpret it. Is there a problem in this? Huge problem. This is why the science of tafsir, we have to learn some of the foundations before you jump in. Because there's people like, oh, I read this verse and I think it means this. Based upon what? Right? Because like I said, in other religions like Christianity or Judaism, they do this all the time. Oh, I read this verse and I think it means this, and this is how I understand it. And they just think that however you understand it is completely valid. Do we have the same concept in Islam? No. Because people can misinterpret anything, and they can interpret almost anything. There's a group went to extremes with regards to his aqeedah, his belief with the family of the Prophet ﷺ. Obviously us as Muslims, do we love the family of the Prophet ﷺ? Yes, we do. We love them. We respect them. We love them. Many of them were scholars, even the descendants. So this story happened to one of the descendants of the Prophet ﷺ through his daughter and through the lineage of Al-Hussein, and his name is Ja'far, and his nickname is As-Sadiq, Ja'far As-Sadiq. But his name is Ja'far ibn Muhammad, and then Ibn Ali, Ibn Hussein, Ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. Right, you see how far it goes back? So he's like maybe 6th or 7th generation. By the way, he was one of the contemporaries of Abu Hanifa. So he's not yani in his own right, okay? Because he has this respectable lineage, people used to overly respect them, but then that respect led them to do some crazy things, to the extent that they used to go around his house to Ja'far al-Sadiq. He's a regular Muslim, he's a regular guy, you know what I mean? He goes to the masjid, he has a business, etc. But they used to believe that he was holy. Basically anything that he touches, he steps on, even his garbage, azzakumullah, is basically holy because this guy touched it, because he's from the lineage of the Prophet. So these people would literally hang out, and it got so, he's telling them, why are you guys doing this? This is maybe 20 or 30 people. And he was so upset, which is basically cursing them, full on. What in the Quran? You know what he quoted? Wallah, this is amazing to me. He quoted a verse from Surah يَأْخُذُ كُلَّ سَفِينَةٍ غَصْبًا. Has anybody heard this verse before? We're going to translate it. It says, and I wanted to put a fault in it, put the hole in it for himself. What is the verse? And he put a hole in it and all these things. His followers. He says, as for me, I am the ship. And as for you guys, he's saying that he's going to Khalifa at the time because he might take us as a heretical group side, but in reality he's on our side. What they did looked like it wasn't on their side. And they were convinced, they said, you know what, you're right. A simple verse, a verse that clearly, but in people's verse and completely misinterpreted. So this is why tafsir is very dangerous, and we have to be very careful when we do tafsir. That's why it always has to be based upon knowledge. Look at what other people have said, look at the context, look at etc. So this is what we're going to be talking about as well. Another danger is that you become a witness for Allah and what Allah wants. This verse is very dangerous, and the part that concerns us in this verse, it says, وَأَن تَقُولُوا عَلَى اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. And one of the dangers, these are the things that are haram. It says, قُلْ إِنَّمَا حَرَّمَ رَبِّي. Indeed, the things that Allah has made haram are the following. And He says, الْفَوَاحِشْ مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا وَالْإِثْمَ وَالْبَغْيَ بِغَيْرِ الْحَقِّ وَأَن تُشْرِكُوا بِاللَّهِ مَا لَمْ يُنَزِّلْ بِهِ سُلْطَانًا وَأَن تَقُولُوا عَلَى اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ. And for you, one of them is, and for you to say about Allah that which you do not know. When I speak about Allah's words, that which I do not know, it's the same thing. That's actually what's referred to in the verse. So if a person just starts saying anything, you know what I mean, about the verses of Allah, this is very dangerous. Okay? Another verse that talks about the danger of explaining or interpreting the verses of Allah without proper knowledge. He says, وَيَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ تَرَى الَّذِينَ كَذَبُوا عَلَى اللَّهِ, the ones who what? Lied about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? What happens to their faces? وُجُوهُهُمْ مُسْوَدَّةٌ, they will be blackened and darkened. Is there not in hell a residence for the arrogant? Of course there is. Why were they doing that? Allah is saying that they were doing it because of their arrogance. They don't want to go back to other scholars like, I'm a scholar in my own right. You know, I have all this, whatever, I can do whatever I want, blah, blah, blah. And I'm a human being, he's a human being. Right? Have we heard this before? And then you start, saying. So, obviously this means that it's very dangerous. What if it's ijtihad? Ijtihad is upon a ruling, not about an interpretation. Does that make sense? And ijtihad has certain dawabit, it has certain criteria that a person has to have in order for them to be aslan min ahli al-ijtihad. Does that make sense? Everybody knows what the word ijtihad means. Ijtihad is where a person exercises their judgment in a place where there is no clear thing to do. We don't know what to do. So for example, a person comes and says, Sheikh, what's the ruling on a surrogate pregnancy? Did that happen at the time of the Prophet ﷺ? No. Is there anything in the Quran about this? No. So we have to do ijtihad now. So we have to look, okay, what is that? How does it happen? What's going on? And then you come up with the ruling. Which is why most of the scholars, when I say majority who and reasons why, but the majority say no, clearly it's not allowed. Does that make sense? So that's ijtihad. But ijtihad, you have to do it with knowledge. You have to have really comprehensive knowledge. You have to have the tools properly, go through a lot to be able to do it. Now we're going to talk about the sources of tafseer. Okay? Any questions so far? We'll try to end at 9 inshallah ta'ala. Is that okay? That way we don't take more time, more than an hour or roughly. Sure. On anything that's went so far?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead. ما هو الفرق بين التفسير والتأويل? So tafsir and ta'wil are usually used interchangeably. Remember we had this discussion before that there are words in Islam and in Arabic that when they're separate they mean the same thing, but when they're together they mean slightly different things. Does that make sense? So tafsir and ta'wil, when we use either or, they mean the same thing. It's just an explanation or interpretation. However, when they're used together, they actually do mean separate things, and we're going to come to this. We're not going to discuss it today. Because ta'wil is a very specific form of tafsir. Tafsir is sometimes just clarifying, very general. But ta'wil has its own meaning. Right? Ta'wil means tahqiq, which means to say precisely what is happening, etc. And so ta'wil is a more but we have a, I think in number 7 or 8 when we come, week number 7, because this is week number 4. So I think 7 or 8, I think we discuss it. طيب. Sources of tafsir, obviously the Quran itself. What do we mean by this? We mean that the Quran itself is a tafsir for itself. What's the ruling on this? Is that good? Is that okay? Yes, 100%. Obviously this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself clarifying what he himself means. Sometimes comes in the Quran very short, in other places will be expanded upon, and vice versa. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will explain something and then after this we'll be very brief with it and just mention it in passing. So this is why in tafsir access to the whole Quran and be able to look at similar verses that talk about similar topics. Okay? Obviously the proof, this is a logical proof since Allah revealed it, obviously He knows what He means the best. So, as an example, we have this question that comes up. Who is the wali of Allah? Or who can be qualified in this group that are known as awliya Allah? What do we mean by this question, awliya Allah?
Right.
Friends of Allah, allies, helpers, assistant, people, assists, not assistants. Does that make sense? But who are they? And why is this by the way, why is this an important question? Yes, 100%. Oh, this guy is a wali. Really? How do you know? Oh, Can we ever claim that somebody definitively is a wali? No, we don't have access to that knowledge. Obviously, do we see signs of righteousness? 100%. But those are just signs that are apparent to us. It could be that there's a person who nobody pays attention to. Eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, huge. And the Prophet mentions this in the hadith. رُبَّ أَشْعَث أَغْبَرْ مَدْفُوعٌ بِالْأَبْوَابِ and he says, وَهُوَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ مَاذَا? لَوْ أَقْسَمَ عَلَى اللَّهِ الْأَبَرَّ. If he were to swear upon Allah, look at this, not even make dua. You know what this means? Sometimes people don't fully understand what this means. He says, the Prophet says, there might be a person, أَشْعَث أغبر, he's dusty all over. مدفوع بالأبواب, people push him out of the way. Like he's that insignificant. Like, who are you, man? Get out of the way. Like, people don't open doors for him. You know, and people don't even pay attention that he exists. And the Prophet says what? If he were to swear upon Allah, Allah would fulfill his oath. Meaning if he says, Wallahi, Ya Allah, I want you to do this, Allah will do it for him. He's not making dua, he's actually making a demand to Allah through swearing, and Allah will fulfill it for him. Because Allah loves him so much. Okay, does that make sense? Clearly, so if a person is righteous with Allah, we would never know. Basically, there's no really way to judge whether a person is truly a wali or not. But let's look at what the Quran answers this question. Does that make sense? So who are the awliya of Allah? According to the Quran, who are they? Very good. This is أَلَا إِنَّ أَوْلِيَاءَ اللَّهِ لَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. So this is a verse that praises the people. Who are they, Ya Allah? The next verse explains it. What's the next verse? Perfect. الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَكَانُوا يَتَّقُونَ. The people who believe and have taqwa. If you believe and you have taqwa, you can be a wali of Allah. Can anybody really claim that though? No. Like our taqwa varies and fluctuates, and even our iman as well. Okay? This is why for a person to claim that is very difficult. And to claim about someone else, where's taqwa? At-taqwa ayn. Ha huna, it's in the heart. But if I say, yeah, this person has a lot of taqwa, really? Did you see their heart? It's very difficult to do that as well. Okay? Those who believes in Allah and has taqwa, Allah is on their side. This is basically what it means to be a wali. Allah is on your side, Allah will help you, He'll support you. Okay? By the way, sometimes that support in the form of what? In the form of what we call karamat. What's a karama? What's a karama when we say karama? Not brother karama, who I met today. Huh?
It's a miracle.
Right, a miracle. Now, when we say a miracle, if we mean the miracle that's mu'jiza, it's different.
It's with the Anbiya, right? Miracle with Anbiya.
100%. A mu'jiza is meant to prove to a disbeliever, because what they just performed is clearly not whatever they thought it was. Does that make sense? So mu'jiza is like Musa's staff, alayhi salam, turning into a snake. When they saw a snake slithering and stuff, they're like, oh, this is just sorcery. So then, we'll come up with something that'll slither and we'll be fine. But then when Musa's snake is eating them, it's clearly alive and well. They're like, this is not magic. This is clearly a live snake. This is beyond us. That's the creator who did this. This is not him. So they obviously believe. But when it happens to a believer, it's not happening like for him in public, for example. He's trying to prove to the disbelievers, hey, Islam is true and I'm going to show you guys, I'm going to perform a miracle. No, this is not what happens. For a believer, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will sometimes aid them in supernatural ways. And it's a karama at that point. Karamat, by the way, happened to many of the Sahaba. There's whole lists that have been made about the karamat of the companions, karamat of even the next generation of Muslims and other people, etc. We have to be careful. Most of the time, karamat are secretive, meaning they're not meant to actually be public. And this is why I personally have met people who they're not public about things that Allah actually has helped them with in their own lives. They have no other explanation other than Allah helped me. You know what I mean? A person was like, I made dua and Allah immediately answered my dua in the most crazy of ways. And okay, that's amazing, that's great. But then you'll hear stories all the time of clearly exaggerated karamat, and sometimes people use these And especially if they're talking publicly about their karamat, obviously they're trying to do what? Anyway, they're trying to like influence people like, hey, look, I'm this miraculous, I'm this amazing person, the truth is on my side, blah, blah, blah. So we always have to be careful. Usually people don't narrate their karamat unless there's like a particular reason. And when you find people who are like very unabashedly about like things that have happened to them, it's clearly fabrication. Wallah, one time I was in a masjid and this guy was we were for the sake of Allah and all these things, and we ran out of gasoline, and we looked in our trunk, and what did we? We didn't have any gasoline, but the car was stuck. So we found some milk, and we made dua, Ya Rab, Ya Rab, and we put the milk in, and the car started running, alhamdulillah, and then on top of this, cheese started coming out of the exhaust. And I'm like, really, guys, I don't, okay. I mean, if you say so, I'm not gonna. So sometimes you're like, okay, sure, Allah Alam. I can't belie you, but there's reasons. So, anyways. We'll take one more example. A few examples. Like I said, we have examples of what we're doing. طيب. We have this from Surah Al-Tariq. وَالسَّمَاءِ وَالطَّارِقِ وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الطَّارِقِ. So Allah swears by as-sama and by al-tariq. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet ﷺ, you don't know what al-tariq is. وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الطَّارِقِ. What does that mean? By the sky, and al-tariq here is translated as the night comer. But aslan al-tariq could also mean the knocker, min al-tarq. And it's a type of star that knocks. So then Allah asks the Prophet ﷺ a question. وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الطَّارِقِ. How would you know what al-tariq is? Here's the thing. Anytime in the Quran we see وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ, what does this mean? As a rule. It's istifham, it's a question, but it means the Prophet ﷺ did not know what this was before. Right? And that he's about to learn. And so Allah is asking a question to pique his interest. And to also indicate, but these are some rules on why this. Also show that there's a relationship between what Allah is swearing by, or what He's saying, and what's about to come. That there's a relationship. This is why He's piquing your interest, and He's piquing the interest of the Prophet ﷺ. There's a relationship. Now, whether we know it or not, that's beyond the point. There is a relationship, and this is where scholars of Tafseer and we can go into this into detail. Okay, but Allah asks him, what is a tariq? Then he explains. Okay? So the next verse does what? Explains what a tariq is. What does he say? An-najmu al-thaqib. It is the piercing star. Okay? That's what it is. By the way, whenever it says وَمَا يُدْرِيكَ instead of وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ. مَا أَدْرَاكَ, what would make you know in the past. But وَمَا يُدْرِيكَ is what? Tense. Al-an, it's present tense. And it's continuous tense. That means what? That the Prophet ﷺ will actually never know that. He will never know that knowledge. So for example, where does وَمَا يُدْرِيكَ come in the Quran? وَمَا يُدْرِيكَ, how would you لعل الساعة تكون قريبة. How would you know? Maybe the sa'a, maybe the hour is actually very close. Obviously, does the Prophet have knowledge of the hour? No, he doesn't. In the case of Surah Abasa, he's saying, how do you know? Maybe this guy is going to become righteous, or he's going to actually do tazkiyah of his nafs, etc., etc. But you don't know that, which shows us that even the Prophet didn't know what was in the hearts of the people, and he didn't know that knowledge of the unseen. See? Make sense so far? طيب, one more. Example number 3. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ دَحَاهَا. This is a question. What does dahaha mean? The earth, after this, he dahaha. Obviously, linguistically, it doesn't mean spread. But what is that? What does spread the earth mean? Allah explains in the next verse. What does he say? وَالْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ دَحَاهَا أَخْرَجَ مِنْهَا مَاءَهَا وَمَرْعَاهَا. That's the spreading of the earth. It's bringing about its water and its pasture. Makes sense? And obviously water and pasture make it spread out and flatten it, etc. Okay? that make sense? So this is the Quran explaining itself. Very easy. These were easy examples. There's other examples where we do cross surah. So like in one surah, Allah will mention another concept, another one. We didn't do that one. But that's also another way to do it. Is that permissible? To do like in one place in the Quran, in a different surah, Allah talks about this, and then maybe over here He talks about that. Is that permissible? Yes. Yes, it is. Because it's the same Quran, right? Any questions? It's 9 o'clock. I know I promised you all we wouldn't take too long. We'll continue this. We still have 7 more slides on this topic, but that's okay, inshallah ta'ala, and we can continue after this. Yes?
It's interesting that ayat, Allah said He took from it water. But now science says water came down.
But in other verses, what does Allah say? وَأَنزَلْنَا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً. Yeah, we sent down from the shismo, which also means that some of the water was in the earth and Allah is bringing it out. So this is talking about maybe a different water. Allahu a'lam, I don't know. Right? There are verses that indicate that Allah sent down the water from the sky. And science right now, and we have to say that disclaimer. We have a whole class that we do, inshallah ta'ala, one time we'll do it, but it's a little longer, on the philosophy of science. Because sometimes people hear, science is not a human being, it can't talk. It has to be interpreted by scientists. And you'll have 2 scientists who see the same data, and what do? They come up with 2 different conclusions. And they're looking at the same data. So when you say science says, this is actually incorrect. That's an incorrect statement. You say some scientists say. But science itself doesn't say anything. Science is a method, right? Just as an example. It does change it. It's not only can, it will and it does. So, one of the scientific theories is what? That the earth did not originate with any water. Right? What were we going to say?
I was going to say how people say...
By the way, that proves further that there is a creator.
Because my teacher, he told me that, but then I raised my hand and I told
No. Obviously, all power over it. But that proof, that what you just said, is proof that there has to be an originator for the heavens and the earth. That it can't come from nothing. Because you can't start from nothing and then end up with something. According to that same theory. Which actually proves that there is a God. Go ahead.
In Surah Tariq, the verse that comes after that.
لَمَّا عَلَيْهَا حَافِظ.
Is there an interpretation of explanation of who this
protector is? Very long.
Does the Quran explain that?
Does the Quran, yeah, so in other places we look at the word hafiz. Where does it exist? وَنَعَلَيْكُمْ لَحَافِظِينَ. Upon you are hafidhin. Then Allah says what? Kiraman katibin. They're honorable, they write. It's talking about the angels. Does that make sense? So in interpreting that, we can definitely do a tafsir from the Quran.
But the angels are just writing. Are they protectors?
So hafiz, what does the word hafiz mean linguistically? It doesn't mean protector.
Protector.
Yeah.
But the angels are not protectors.
So this is why the scholars say there are 2 sets of angels. There are angels that are called hafadha and angels that are kataba. And both in a sense are hafadha and both in a sense are kataba. But they're actually one where their primary job is to protect you, and the other 2, their primary job is to actually write. So the ones that write are on the right and on the left, and the ones that protect you, it says min bayni aydihim wa min khalfihim. And then in the Quran it says from front of them and behind them, which are clearly now establishing that these are different than the other 2 angels. And on top of this, we know that there's an angel that only whispers for you to do good, to combat what the shaitan does when he whispers you to do bad. So now we added 5 angels. 5 angels at a minimum are with every human being. And then on top of that, there's even more. If the person is making dhikr, if the person is reading Quran, if the person is in a state of janaba or a state of tahara, that adds more or takes away more. So now it kind of changes your perspective. You're like, man, I have 5 angels with me at any given time. It's gonna.
What if after somebody died, what did the angels do?
Any other questions, inshallah ta'ala, about it so far? I hope it was. Yes, go ahead.
Is there any examples that you guys know of any karam happened with Sahaba during the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam?
Yes. Oh, are there karamat that? Yes, there's multiple. So as an example, Sahabi, he comes to the Prophet ﷺ and he says, Ya Rasulullah, I was sitting outside of my house at night and I saw lights coming. And my horse was disturbed and things were happening. Right? And then the Prophet ﷺ said what? He asked him, what were you doing? He said, I was reciting Surah Al-Kahf. And he says, those are the angels descending to listen to your recitation. And he said, if you continued, he said, I stopped because my horse was freaking out. The Prophet ﷺ told him what? If you continued, what would have happened? Yeah, they would have landed on earth and you would have seen them. Yani. That's clearly a karama. It wasn't necessarily beneficial, but he saw it with his own eyes. That's just one. Obviously, karamat in the battles, Battle of Badr, you know what I mean, and other places, etc., very clearly. Not only happening to the Prophet, but happening to the Sahaba as well. Okay. Very good.